I never imagined my beloved Harley would lead to a face-off on my own driveway with our HOA president screaming in my face. But when Karen doubled my fees over my motorcycle restoration projects, she had no idea who she was messing with. By the time I was done, her precious quiet suburban life would be shattered. Literally. You think power-hungry HOAs can push around a retired Harley mechanic? Just wait until you hear what happened next. For 15 years, I've lived peacefully in Oakwood Estates, a quiet suburban community where I retired after 30 years as a mechanic for Harley Davidson. I bought this house specifically for the large garage where I could continue my passion, restoring vintage motorcycles. Nothing makes me happier than bringing these classic machines back to life, piece by piece. My pride and joy is my custom Harley chopper that I ride on weekends, but I also keep 2 classic bikes in my garage that I'm slowly bringing back to life. They don't run, they're just frames and parts, projects that keep my hands busy and my mind sharp in retirement. One's a 1957 Panhead I inherited from my father, and the other's a rare 1948 Knucklehead I rescued from a junkyard. These bikes represent my life's work and passion. Everything changed last fall when our longtime HOA president retired and Karen Mitchell took over. From day one, Karen made it clear she had plans to elevate our community standards. Translation: she was going to be a nightmare. During her first speech as president, she talked about removing eyesores and enforcing property aesthetics. The way she glanced at my house during that speech told me everything I needed to know. I was in her crosshairs. Karen's first move was to increase monthly inspections from quarterly to weekly. Every Wednesday morning, like clockwork, she'd power walk through the neighborhood with her clipboard and measuring tape, documenting every minor infraction. My next-door neighbor Jim got fined because his grass was half an inch too tall. The Wilsons across the street received a violation for having their grandkids' bikes visible in their driveway for more than 24 hours. The retired couple on the corner, both in their 80s, were cited for improper mailbox height. Their mailbox had been at the same height for 20 years. Karen's reign of terror was affecting everyone, but she seemed to have a special focus on anyone who didn't fit her vision of the perfect neighborhood. I kept my head down, made sure my lawn was perfect, and minded my own business. But I could tell Karen had her eye on me. She'd slow down whenever she passed my house, peering at my garage like she was trying to see through the walls. The few times I had my garage door open while working on my bikes, I caught her taking pictures from across the street. "Just documenting potential violations," she said sweetly when I waved at her once. "You know how it is, we all have to follow the rules." The fake smile on her face made my skin crawl. I dealt with people like Karen my whole life, folks who use a little bit of power to make everyone else miserable. One Saturday morning while I was at the auto parts store, my wife called me in a panic. "Karen is in our driveway taking pictures through the garage windows," she said. "She's using her phone flashlight to see inside." I raced home, my truck screeching into the driveway to find Karen with her face practically pressed against the glass, her phone out, documenting my restoration projects. She was so engrossed in her spying that she didn't even hear me pull up. When she finally noticed me, she didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. "Mr. Davidson," she said, all fake sweetness, "I'm conducting a routine inspection. I received reports of unauthorized commercial activity at this address." "From our garage?" I asked, my blood pressure rising. "And who gave you permission to come onto my property and look through my windows?" "As HOA president, I have the authority to investigate potential violations," she replied, chin raised. "Did you know that operating a commercial business from a residential property violates HOA bylaws?" "I'm not operating any business," I told her, struggling to keep my voice calm. "These are personal restoration projects. Hobbies. Like how some people garden or build model trains." She smiled that condescending smile of hers. 3 motorcycles on one property exceeds our vehicle limits. And these?" She glanced at her phone, scrolling through the photos she'd just taken. "Restoration activities constitute commercial work. Those bikes don't even run," I said. "They're just frames and parts. They're not even complete vehicles." "Rules are rules, Mr. Davidson," she said, walking past me toward the street. You'll be hearing from the board soon. As she walked away, I noticed her taking pictures of my wife's car and my truck, muttering something about excessive vehicles under her breath. The next day, I decided to roll my Harley out onto the driveway to clean it. It was a beautiful Sunday morning, perfect for some bike maintenance. I had just started washing the chrome when I saw Karen marching across the street, clipboard in hand, wearing that blue button-up shirt she always wore for official HOA business. "Excuse me," she shouted from halfway across the street. "What do you think you're doing?" "Cleaning my motorcycle," I replied calmly, continuing to polish the chrome. "Is that a problem?" She stormed right up to my face, pointing her finger just inches from my nose. "That's it. This is the third motorcycle I've documented on your property," she shouted, her face twisted with anger. I stood my ground, bandana tied around my head, my leather vest still on from my morning ride. "This is my personal motorcycle, Karen. It's registered, legal, and parked on my own property. The rules clearly state," she started, but I cut her off. "The rules state nothing about a single motorcycle in a driveway," I growled. "You're making this up because you don't like me or my hobby. I've seen inside your garage," she hissed. "You're running an illegal repair shop. 3 motorcycles. Parts everywhere. Those are personal projects, and you had no right to peek through my windows," I said, trying to remain calm despite my growing anger. "I'm doubling your HOA fees effective immediately," she screamed, jabbing her finger toward my chest. Her clipboard clutched tightly against her blue shirt. "Too many bikes. This isn't some biker bar." Several neighbors came outside, witnessing Karen's meltdown on my driveway. She was so close I could see the veins in her neck pulsing with rage. My Harley gleamed in the sun behind us, the focal point of her unreasonable hatred. "You can't do that," I said calmly, which only seemed to infuriate her more. "Watch me," she spat, and stormed off, already typing furiously on her phone. The neighbors who had witnessed the confrontation shook their heads. Jim from next door walked over. "She's gone too far this time, Mike. That was completely uncalled for." I nodded, my blood boiling. "She doesn't know who she's messing with." 2 days later, I found a violation notice taped to my front door. The envelope was bright orange with "urgent violation" stamped across it, clearly designed to embarrass homeowners in front of their neighbors. Inside was a formal letter on HOA letterhead: "Notice of violation. Excessive vehicle accumulation and unauthorized commercial activity." Karen had decided that my hobby constituted a business, and each non-operational motorcycle counted as a separate vehicle violation. The penalty? My monthly HOA fees were immediately doubled from $350 to $700, with an additional $100 fine for obstruction of inspection. I was furious. My wife read through the notice twice, her face getting redder each time. "This is ridiculous," she said. "How can they double our fees over this?" The bikes were completely inside my garage. They weren't visible from the street. They didn't make noise. And I certainly wasn't running a business. I was a retired man pursuing his hobby. The only evidence Karen had was from her illegal snooping through our windows. I called 3 members of the HOA board that evening, trying to get an explanation. None of them returned my calls. The next day, I sent a formal letter contesting the violation, citing the HOA bylaws that defined vehicles as operational transportation devices. My project bikes weren't operational. They didn't even have engines installed. A week later, I received a 1-line response: "Violation stands as determined by the board president." That's when I realized this wasn't about rules at all. This was about Karen's personal vendetta against me, for reasons I couldn't understand. Maybe she didn't like motorcycles. Maybe she didn't like me. Or maybe she just enjoyed wielding power over others. Whatever her reasons, I wasn't going to roll over and accept this injustice. I'd spent my entire career fixing things that were broken, and it was clear that our HOA was severely broken. It was time to start working on a repair plan. The next HOA meeting was a joke. 20 neighbors crammed into the community center as Karen presented a PowerPoint presentation on community standards enforcement. The centerpiece of her presentation? a slideshow featuring the photos she'd taken through my garage window. She'd labeled each motorcycle part with dramatic titles like commercial inventory and excessive vehicle storage. There were close-up shots of my tool bench, my parts shelves, and even an old Harley poster on my wall, all presented as evidence of a commercial operation. "As you can see," Karen said, pointing to my father's old panhead frame, "some residents are turning our beautiful neighborhood into a motorcycle repair shop." When it was time for resident comments, I raised my hand. Karen tried to skip over me, but several neighbors insisted I be allowed to speak. I walked to the front of the room and faced my neighbors. "What you're looking at are restoration projects, hobby bikes that I work on in my spare time. They don't run, they don't make noise, and they're completely inside my garage." I explained that the bikes didn't even have engines installed. They couldn't run if they wanted to. I showed documentation proving that I wasn't running a business, including my retirement papers from Harley Davidson. "Rules are rules, Mr. Davidson," Karen said, not even looking up from her notes. "Perhaps if you can't afford proper storage for your collection, this neighborhood isn't right for you." A few neighbors nodded in agreement, Karen's cronies who always backed her up, but I noticed many others looking uncomfortable. Jim from next door spoke up. "Karen, this seems excessive. Mike's bikes are in his garage, not bothering anyone." Karen cut him off. "You're out of order. The board has already voted." Mrs. Wilson, the retired school teacher whose grandkids had been cited for leaving their bikes out, stood up. "I'd like to know when the board voted on this. There was no mention of it in the minutes." Karen shuffled her papers nervously. "It was an emergency executive session. We don't have to document those." That's when I realized Karen was making things up as she went along. There had been no vote. There had been no emergency session. She was acting unilaterally, hiding behind the authority of the board. As the meeting ended, several neighbors approached me, expressing their support privately. "She's been doing this to everyone," whispered Mrs. Rodriguez. "Last month she fined me for growing vegetables in my backyard. Said they were unsightly plants." It was becoming clear I wasn't the only victim of Karen's reign of terror. The question was, what could we do about it? I left that meeting determined to fight back. That weekend, I installed security cameras around my property, not just for protection, but to document Karen's behavior. It didn't take long to pay off. The very next Tuesday, my cameras caught Karen trespassing on my property at 6:30 a.m., attempting to peek through my garage windows again. This time, I had crystal clear video evidence of her illegal behavior. The footage was damning. Karen tiptoeing across my lawn, cupping her hands against my garage window, then using her phone's flashlight to illuminate the interior. She even tried the door handle to see if it was unlocked. I took the footage to 3 other HOA board members, showing them Karen's trespassing. They were shocked. One board member, Janet, admitted she had no idea Karen was conducting inspections this way. "This is completely unauthorized," she said, "and potentially illegal." Another board member, Tom, was visibly disturbed by the footage. "She told us she was documenting violations from public areas," he said. "This is trespassing, plain and simple." "This was my first small victory." Janet and Tom promised to bring it up at the next board meeting. They also advised me to keep my security cameras running at all times. Karen was furious when she found out I had video evidence. The following day, she arranged for a special vote to ban security cameras that weren't aesthetically consistent with neighborhood standards. She circulated a new bylaw proposal requiring all security equipment to be invisible from the street, a rule clearly designed to force me to remove my cameras. But her plan backfired. Many neighbors, concerned about their own privacy, opposed the new camera restrictions. The proposal was tabled indefinitely after several residents pointed out that limiting security measures might increase neighborhood crime rates. Karen's defeat on the camera issue was small but significant. For the first time, the community had pushed back against one of her arbitrary rules. And more importantly, I now had documentation of her harassment, evidence I could use to build my case. While researching HOA bylaws to fight the camera ban, I discovered something interesting. Karen's husband Bob owned a property management company called Mitchell Community Management. What was even more interesting was that 3 months ago, our HOA had hired this company to enforce community standards and process violation fees. Every fine they collected, every fee increase they implemented, meant more money in their pockets. This was a clear conflict of interest that Karen had never disclosed to the community. Even better, when I dug deeper into our HOA bylaws, I found something Karen had clearly overlooked. Our bylaws specifically defined vehicles as operational transportation devices capable of legal road use. My restoration projects didn't qualify, they weren't operational, had no engines installed, and couldn't be legally driven. By the HOA's own definition, they weren't vehicles at all. I also discovered that board members were explicitly prohibited from entering private property or photographing through windows without written permission, a clear invasion of privacy that Karen had committed multiple times. The more I researched, the more ammunition I gathered. The HOA bylaws had strict rules about conflicts of interest, requiring board members to recuse themselves from votes involving financial gain. Karen had violated these rules repeatedly. Armed with this information, I requested a special hearing with the board. My request included documentation of Karen's trespassing, evidence of the conflict of interest with her husband's company, and citations of the specific bylaws she had violated. Karen denied my request 3 times, each time with a new excuse. First, she claimed the board was too busy. Then, she said my complaint wasn't properly formatted. Finally, she stated that only she, as president, could call special meetings, another rule she had fabricated. Her stonewalling only confirmed what I already knew. Karen was abusing her power, and she knew she would be in trouble if the full board reviewed my evidence. After exhausting every reasonable avenue, I realized Karen wasn't going to play fair. The bylaws provided an appeal process, but that appeal would go to Karen herself. The system was rigged, and playing by the rules wasn't going to work. That's when I decided, if she wanted to play hardball, I could play too. If she was so concerned about my motorcycles, maybe she should experience what they're really like. I knew from neighborhood gossip that Karen was a notoriously light sleeper. Her bedroom window faced the street, and she'd complained numerous times about traffic noise, even getting speed bumps installed to slow cars down. At the last HOA meeting, she'd spent 20 minutes ranting about a motorcycle that had driven through the neighborhood at 9 p.m., calling it disruptive to the community's peace. I spent the next week setting up my plan. I purchased 4 high-quality waterproof outdoor speakers and a directional sound system designed for outdoor events. These weren't ordinary speakers, they used parabolic technology to focus sound in a specific direction, like a spotlight for audio. I also bought a digital timer and a small computer to control the system remotely. Then I spent an afternoon recording my Harley at various RPMs, capturing that distinctive rumble that true motorcycle enthusiasts love and HOA presidents despise. I recorded the engine starting, idling, revving, and the unique potato sound of a Harley at low RPMs. I tested different volumes and directional settings to ensure the sound would reach Karen's bedroom window without disturbing the rest of the neighborhood. The technology was precise enough that I could direct the sound at a single window, Karen's window, while leaving the surrounding houses relatively undisturbed. It wouldn't be completely silent for others nearby, but the sound would be much more muted for them than for Karen. The final step was placement. Under cover of darkness, I positioned the speakers in the wooded area across from Karen's house, camouflaging them with branches and leaves. The speakers were weather-sealed and battery-powered, controlled remotely via a secure connection from my home computer. By the end of the week, everything was in place. Karen had messed with the wrong mechanic. At exactly 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, the morning of Karen's precious board meeting, I remotely activated the speakers from my computer. The sound of a Harley engine revving to life shattered the night silence. It wasn't loud enough to disturb the whole neighborhood, just enough to penetrate Karen's bedroom window with clarity while being much fainter for her neighbors. From my window, I could see a light flip on in Karen's house almost immediately. The timing was perfect. 3 a.m. is when sleep is deepest, making a sudden awakening particularly disorienting. After 2 minutes, I turned off the sound. Just enough to wake her up, not enough to justify a noise complaint. I watched as Karen's silhouette appeared at her bedroom window, peering out into the darkness, searching for the source of the noise. At 3:45 a.m., I triggered another 30 seconds of rumbling, the distinctive idle of a Harley, focused primarily at her window. Again, Karen's bedroom light came on, and this time I saw her open her window and stick her head out, looking up and down the street. At 4:20 a.m., the sound of a motorcycle idling for 20 seconds, followed by a quick rev this time. Karen actually came outside in her bathrobe, smartphone in hand, trying to record evidence of the disturbance. But by the time she got her phone ready, the sound had stopped. She stood in her driveway for several minutes, turning in circles, frustrated and confused. At 5:10 a.m., just before her alarm would go off, one final rev, the full-throated roar of my Harley at high RPM, lasting just 10 seconds but loud enough to ensure she wouldn't fall back asleep. The next morning, I watched from my driveway as Karen stumbled out to her car, dark circles under her eyes, looking thoroughly exhausted. She glared at my house as she drove past, clearly suspecting me but having no proof. I smiled and waved, the picture of innocence. At the board meeting that evening, Karen was off her game. She fumbled through her agenda, lost her place several times, and snapped at residents who asked questions. When Jim mentioned that she seemed tired, she launched into a rant about hooligans on motorcycles, terrorizing the neighborhood at night. "Did anyone else hear these motorcycles?" asked Janet from the board. Karen looked around desperately. A couple of hands went up from residents living closest to Karen, but they mentioned hearing only faint sounds that didn't really bother them. Most residents hadn't heard anything at all. "They were targeting me specifically?" Karen insisted, her voice cracking with fatigue and frustration. "Someone is trying to drive me crazy." The seed was planted. Karen was beginning to unravel, and it was only day one. For the next week, the pattern continued. Random motorcycle sounds, always between 3 o'clock and 5 a.m., always short enough to be gone by the time Karen fully woke up. I varied the timing and duration each night, making it impossible for her to predict or prepare. One night it was 2:47 a.m., the next, 3:22 a.m., sometimes just a startup sound. Other times, the rumble of an idle. Occasionally, a full-throttle rev that would jolt her awake instantly. I was careful never to create a pattern. Some nights, the sounds would come 3 or 4 times. Other nights, just once. And occasionally, I'd skip a night entirely, letting her think it was over, only to start again the following night. Karen was unraveling quickly. At the grocery store, I overheard her complaining to the manager about motorcycle gangs terrorizing the neighborhood at night. "They're circling my house," she insisted. "They're trying to drive me insane." The manager, clearly uncomfortable, suggested she call the police. "I've tried," Karen practically shouted. "They never get there in time. These bikers are organized." Karen called the police 3 times that week, but by the time they arrived, there was nothing to hear and no evidence to find. The officers took her reports, but I could tell from their expressions that they weren't taking her seriously. One officer gently suggested that perhaps she was experiencing auditory hallucinations due to stress. That suggestion sent Karen into a rage. "I'm not hallucinating," she screamed at the officer. "I know what I'm hearing." She sent out frantic emails to the HOA about implementing strict noise regulations and overnight curfews. One particularly unhinged email at 4 a.m. proposed a neighborhood-wide ban on all recreational vehicles, including but not limited to motorcycles, ATVs, and loud cars. Karen even hired a private security company to patrol the streets, at HOA expense, of course. The guards drove around all night, looking for motorcycle gangs that didn't exist. After a week with no findings, the security company suggested that perhaps the noise was coming from outside the neighborhood, or maybe from a faulty HVAC system in her own home. Every suggestion that the motorcycles weren't real only pushed Karen closer to the edge. 10 days into my nighttime campaign, I was cleaning my Harley in the driveway when Karen's car screeched to a halt in front of my house. She stormed up my driveway, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was uncombed, her clothes wrinkled, and the dark circles under her eyes had turned a deep purple. "I know it's you," she screamed, pointing at my motorcycle. "You're behind these nighttime disturbances." I calmly polished my chrome fender. "What nighttime disturbances, Karen?" "The motorcycles. The engines. At 3 a.m. She was so agitated she was practically jumping up and down. "You're doing this to torture me." I gestured to my bike. "My motorcycle's been right here every night, Karen. Just ask my security cameras. They record 24/7, and they show my bike hasn't left this property in over a week." Her face contorted with rage. "You're gaslighting me. Everyone thinks I'm crazy, but I know what I'm hearing." Neighbors began to gather, watching the spectacle. Mrs. Wilson came out of her house across the street. The Johnsons paused their yard work. Even Jim, my next-door neighbor, stepped onto his porch to watch. Karen was becoming more unhinged by the second, screaming about motorcycle gangs and conspiracies while I remained perfectly composed. "I haven't slept in 10 days because of you," she shrieked. "The police think I'm insane. The security company thinks I'm hearing things. Maybe you should take some time off, Karen," I suggested. "You don't look well. The stress of running the HOA might be affecting your health." That only enraged her more. She actually reached for my motorcycle as if to push it over, but I stepped between her and my bike. "Don't touch my property," I said firmly. "I understand you're upset, but damaging my motorcycle would be a crime." She jabbed her finger into my chest. "You think you're so clever," she hissed. "But I'm going to prove it's you. I'm going to catch you." As she stormed off, I noticed several neighbors filming the encounter on their phones. Karen's public meltdown was being documented from multiple angles, and I had no doubt these videos would be circulating in the neighborhood group chat within minutes. She stormed off, shouting that she'd get me evicted from the neighborhood. "Nobody wants a biker gang member in Oakwood Estates," she screamed over her shoulder. Jim walked over after Karen left. "Man, she's losing it," he said. "What's this about motorcycles at night? I've heard some faint noises occasionally, but nothing worth getting this worked up about." I shrugged. "No idea. But she doesn't look well, does she?" "Not at all," Jim agreed. "The power's going to her head. Or maybe it's the lack of sleep she's talking about." As we spoke, I noticed several neighbors looking at me with new respect. Karen had been terrorizing everyone for months, and now she was the one who looked unstable and unreasonable. The tide of neighborhood opinion was turning against her. 2 weeks into my campaign, Karen called an emergency HOA meeting. She looked terrible, hair uncombed, clothes wrinkled, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. The meeting agenda had only one item: nighttime noise violations and security concerns. Karen stood at the podium, swaying slightly from exhaustion. "We have a serious problem in our community," she began, her voice hoarse. "For the past 2 weeks, motorcycles have been terrorizing our neighborhood between the hours of 2 and 5 a.m. She clicked to her first PowerPoint slide, which was supposed to show evidence of the motorcycle gang. Instead, it was just a blurry photo of her empty street at night. "I haven't been able to capture them on camera," she admitted. "They're too quick. But I know what I'm hearing. It's a coordinated attack on our community's peace and safety." She proposed installing security cameras throughout the neighborhood and implementing a ban on all motorcycles, operational or not. She also wanted to increase HOA fees by 30% to pay for 24/7 security patrols. "These motorcycles are destroying our community's peace," she declared, her voice cracking. "I haven't slept in 2 weeks because of the noise." Jim, my neighbor, raised his hand. "Karen, I've only heard faint motorcycle sounds a couple of times, and I'm right next door to you. It wasn't enough to wake me fully. Maybe it's coming from the highway." Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived on the other side of Karen, spoke up. "I've heard something a few times, but I thought it was just someone passing through. It didn't seem targeted." Others had mixed experiences. A few residents nearest to Karen had heard occasional sounds, but nothing as intense as she described. Most had heard nothing at all. "They're targeting me," Karen shouted, losing her composure completely. "It's a conspiracy to drive me out of the HOA presidency." The room fell silent, everyone uncomfortable with Karen's outburst. Janet, from the board, gently suggested that perhaps Karen was under too much stress. "The presidency is demanding," Janet said. "Maybe you need a break, Karen. For your health." That's when I stood up. "Karen, I'm concerned about your well-being. Perhaps the stress of running the HOA is affecting your health. Maybe you should take a break." The look she gave me could have melted steel. "You?" she hissed. "You're behind this. I know it's you." The room erupted in whispers. Karen was publicly accusing me without evidence, in front of the entire community. Even her allies on the board looked uncomfortable. "Karen," said Tom from the board, "you can't make accusations without evidence. Do you have any proof that Mike is involved?" Karen sputtered. "I don't need proof. I know it's him. Who else has motorcycles in this neighborhood?" "Actually," said Jim, "my son has a motorcycle. So does Dr. Richards on Maple Street. And I believe Mr. Gonzalez has a vintage Triumph." Karen's face fell as she realized her accusation was falling apart. The meeting ended without any of her proposals being approved, and as residents filed out, many stopped to look at her with concern and pity. Her crusade against me was backfiring spectacularly. Instead of turning the neighborhood against me, she was alienating everyone with her increasingly erratic behavior. Karen's husband Bob started investigating on his own, convinced that someone was harassing his wife. He installed motion-activated cameras around their property, covering every angle of approach. He even hired a private investigator to monitor the neighborhood at night. The next morning, I watched from my window as Bob reviewed the footage with the PI. Nothing. No motorcycles. No trespassers. Just the occasional night animal and the normal suburban silence. What Bob didn't know, what Karen didn't know, was that my speakers were positioned just outside the camera's range, and the sound was directed specifically at their bedroom window using parabolic audio technology I'd learned about during my years working with engine diagnostics. The sound traveled in a focused beam, like a spotlight, hitting their window directly while being much fainter for surrounding areas. This explained why some neighbors heard faint sounds while others heard nothing at all. Meanwhile, I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board about the invasion of privacy and the improper fine increase. I included printouts of the bylaws, highlighting the definitions of vehicles and the rules about photographing private property. I also included documentation of the conflict of interest with Karen's husband's company and the financial benefit they received from increased fines. The numbers were shocking. Since Karen had taken over as president, violation fees had increased by 340%, and nearly 70% of those fees went directly to her husband's management company. Janet and Tom called me the next day. They had reviewed my documentation and were deeply concerned. "We had no idea about the conflict of interest," Janet admitted. "Karen presented it as if Mitchell Community Management was the only option, and we never questioned it." Tom was even more direct. "This is potentially illegal. The HOA is a non-profit organization, and board members cannot profit from their positions." They promised to call an emergency board meeting without Karen to address these issues. For the first time, I felt like justice might actually be possible. That night, as if sensing the walls closing in, Karen's midnight patrols became more desperate. My security cameras caught her walking the neighborhood at 2 a.m., smartphone in hand, trying to catch the phantom motorcycles. She looked completely unhinged, running from one street corner to another at the slightest sound, her bathrobe flapping in the night breeze. The next morning, several neighbors reported seeing her. The neighborhood watch group chat was buzzing with concern, not about motorcycles but about Karen's mental state. "In light of recent events," Janet announced, "we believe it's in everyone's best interest, including Karen's, that she stepped down from the board entirely. We'll be sending formal notification today." The community broke into spontaneous applause. Neighbors hugged each other, some with tears in their eyes. After months of living under Karen's tyranny, freedom felt sweet indeed. The night after Karen was removed as president, I disconnected my nighttime sound system. This job was done. I carefully retrieved the speakers from the woods under cover of darkness, leaving no trace behind. I knew what I had done technically wasn't legal, and while it had been effective, I wasn't interested in causing any lasting trouble now that justice had been served through proper channels. The next week, a for sale sign appeared on Karen and Bob's lawn. The rumor was that they couldn't face the community after the revelations about their conflict of interest and Karen's unauthorized actions. As they were loading the moving truck, I couldn't resist one last gesture. I rolled my freshly restored vintage Harley out of the garage, the 1957 panhead that had been the center of this whole controversy. After months of work, it was finally complete, its chrome gleaming in the morning sun, the engine purring like a contented cat. Karen froze on her driveway as I cruised past, revving the engine just once. The look on her face was worth every minute of planning, a mixture of rage, defeat, and the dawning realization of what had really been happening all along. Bob dropped the box he was carrying and put his arm around Karen, who seemed on the verge of another meltdown. But there was nothing they could do now. Their reign of terror was over, and the entire neighborhood knew what they had tried to do. As I circled the block, neighbors came out to admire the restored panhead. Many gave me thumbs up or knowing smiles. A few of the neighbors who had heard faint motorcycle sounds at night gave me particularly knowing looks, but no one said anything directly. Some things are better left unspoken among good neighbors who've survived a common enemy. The roar of that Harley engine, once Karen's excuse for persecution, now sounded like a victory anthem echoing through the streets of Oakwood Estates. The for sale sign came down from Karen and Bob's house last month. I heard they moved to a condo with no garages allowed and an HOA even stricter than ours, though hopefully more honest in its enforcement. The new HOA president, Jim from next door, made it a point to revise the bylaws to specifically protect homeowners' rights to pursue hobbies within their own garages. The new rules clarified that non-operational project vehicles stored completely within garages did not count toward vehicle limits. These days, I restore motorcycles in peace, and sometimes, when the garage door is open and I'm working late, neighbors stop by to admire my work. Mrs. Rodriguez brings me homemade tamales. Mr. Chen's teenager wants advice on buying his first motorcycle. Even the Wilsons, who used to complain about motorcycle noise, asked me to help their grandson fix his dirt bike. Last weekend, we had the first annual Oakwood Estates Vintage Vehicle Show on the community green. 12 residents brought out their project cars, motorcycles, and even a restored tractor. Hundreds of people from surrounding neighborhoods came to admire the craftsmanship and passion on display. As for me, I'm now working on that 1948 knucklehead, the one Karen claimed was evidence of my illegal business. When it's finished, I plan to ride it in the 4th of July parade, leading a procession of neighborhood classic vehicles. Freedom has never sounded so sweet as the rumble of that Harley engine on a quiet Sunday morning, with no power-hungry HOA president to tell me I can't pursue my passion. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just getting even, it's creating a better community for everyone once the tyrants are gone.